Hello, I'm Kelly Blackledge from Tamarac National Wildlife Refuge. And today we're going to take a little hike again through the woods to look at some spring wildflowers. One of the best times of the year, I think, is as those blooms start coming out and you may be kind of curious, what is that flower? Or maybe some of the leaves that you're seeing that have a lot of texture to them. So grab your bug spray because it is summertime and we're going to take a look at some of these amazing spring wildflowers. There's so much out there to see and how it is super lush out there. So again, you want to have bug spray with you. The spring rains also bring some of those spring mosquitoes. So it's a neat place, a super lush place in the woods, but you want to be prepared. And of course, if you're going to hike a lot, you want to tuck your socks into your pant legs to make sure those little ticks stay on the outside of your clothing. Or if you're going to be wandering a bit, rubber boots, knee-high rubber boots will help keep some of those bugs from attaching to you. They do come up from the ground, so that can reduce the amount of bugs that you'll see. So the woods right now are just so lush. The leaves across the forest floor are really coming up, and there's so many different kinds. And knowing how to identify or just noticing the difference in these leaves can be a great way to tell the difference between the wildflowers that you're seeing. So we should probably look at some leaves like this first. There's a few leaves that you should know about. Obviously, in here, there is some poison ivy, but do you know which plant is which? Well, you're probably right. If you look at the leaves of 3, let it be. That's poison ivy. And the poison ivy leaves have kind of a jagged edge to them, but not a regular jagged edge. It's kind of irregular. Sometimes there will even be smooth edges on it. There's also a plant out there that looks very familiar or similar that has jagged leaves, but it has 5, usually a group of 5 leaves, and that's Regina Creeper, or sometimes people call it woodbine. That plant is really beautiful in the fall and certainly won't harm you. Leaves of 3, let it be. That's poison ivy. Now this plant we talked about in the early spring ephemeral wildflowers, and now there's just a lot of these leaves covering the forest ground. Do you remember which one is this really heavily lobed leaf, or the other one on the other side, which is kind of heart-shaped leaf? Well, the heavily lobed leaf is bloodroot. That has that white flower to it. And now those leaves are kind of laying flat and across the forest floor. And that heart-shaped leaf is wild ginger. So you'll see a lot of ginger leaves also covering the forest floor out there, even though the flower is done now. And lots of columbine still covering, sparkling kind of throughout the woods there in their lovely lantern-like shaped flower with the little white or yellow light underneath. I think that makes it look a lot like a lantern. It even has a light on the inside. Well, you know, I was always told that the hummingbirds come through as the columbine starts to bloom. So once the columbine blooms, the hummingbirds start to come, which is not necessarily true in terms of stimulating migration for hummingbirds. Hummingbirds do like to feed on columbine. They do have a great nectar source for them there, and they can certainly feed on that as it blooms farther and farther north. But birds often migrate because of the change in light. So the amount of daylight that changes will stimulate those birds to start to migrate. So it's not necessarily the food that's available or not available. So don't worry about your hummingbird feeders being out too long or out, not early enough. That really just draws them to a place that is easy for you to watch. It makes it fun to watch. So it's actually nice to leave your hummingbird feeders out as long as you can, so that those that are straggling behind have some food source as they're trying to make it south. Well, a lot of our flowers in the woods right now are white blooms, and they can be kind of confusing. This one I think is pretty stunning. It's, the white bloom there with the little bit in the middle is just so spectacular. And these leaves have deep grooves to them, so it's pretty identifiable. So this is called the bunchberry. It has that nice 4-leaf bloom there, and really sturdy green leaves. They're just a little bit more prominent, I think. And yes, it does develop berries later in the summer. Bunchberry you might find out there, but not to be confused with this one that has kind of pointed leaves and a whorl of leaves around it. This one has more of a star-shaped flower, so we might as well call it the star flower. That's its name, star flower. So watch for this one. Also a very short little plant on the forest floor, but you know it's not a bunchberry because of those star-shaped flower and that whorl of pointy leaves. Here's one that has a unique set of leaves. I think it looks kind of like a ladder, but this one is called false Solomon seal, and the bloom happens right at the end of that plant. A nice spray of white flowers there. False Solomon seal. So you're probably wondering, well, what's true Solomon seal? In our neck of the woods, it's this one that has the flowers, the little bell-like flowers, all the way along that ladder-like leaf underneath. And this one is smooth Solomon seal. So this one likes to grow more so in the lighter areas, or much more, areas that have a lot more sunlight. Another white one is the Canada anemone. Now, earlier we talked about seeing the woodland anemone, which is a great little wildflower and kind of tiny. This one is much taller. It could be 12 inches tall, and usually growing again more in those sunnier areas because our woods are pretty dark now. So the blooms that are happening now are really reaching for some of that sunlight. Canada anemone, but look at that leaf. It's a lot like the woodland anemone leaf, kind of jagged edges and pointy. Canada anemone. Now we're going to move on to some that have a little bit more color. Well, next to that Canada anemone, you might find this one. This one's called Virginia waterleaf. Look how similar that leaf is. Kind of pointy, jagged edges. I think this one looks like kind of a fireworks display there with the blooms that it has on it. A little bit of purple on these leaves, are bluish purple, and that's Virginia waterleaf. Well, this one, it has a beautiful purplish color. And again, look at those leaves, very jagged edges. This sweet little plant is called wild geranium. It's really not at all like the geraniums that we have in pots, from the landscaping companies. Wild geranium is a pretty dainty little plant, and will have these beautiful little bluish purple flowers throughout. And so you usually see a bunch of these. And the wild rose is starting to bloom. I love these. Of course, this is more of a woody shrub and has thorns on its stems to protect it from animals eating it. But what a beautiful bloom to see out there on our roadsides and in some of the fields is this wild rose. Beautiful blooming little plant, and can survive quite a bit because it does have those thorns. Again, a lot of animals will leave it alone. And I love that in the fall or later in the summer, you'll start to see the rose hips or the fruit of this plant come to fruition. This one is really high in vitamin C. You've probably heard stories of how the rose hips saved people from scurvy. That was a real issue, but because of the vitamin C contained in this plant, you can make it, you might see rose hip tea, lots of things used from rose hips. So a great source of vitamin C. Also blooming, the yellow lady slipper. I love seeing these out there, and they do look a little bit like a slipper, but we have lots of orchid. Look how cute it is that they have those twisted little leaflets on the side of that yellow bloom. And this yellow bloom can be upwards of maybe 2 inches long. This is the greater yellow lady slipper. Now we also have a smaller one that's called the small yellow lady slipper. And this bloom is closer to only about 1 inch. So a little bit smaller. It does have those twisted, it looks really similar. It's just tiny. You can see it compared to my finger there, how tiny this little guy is. But we have both, and they bloom quite a bit longer, I would say, than maybe the showy lady slipper. But that's on its way too. This one will start blooming. What a great little orchid. And it's, this one has a lot of needs in terms of soil to be able to bloom. But look at those leaves. That's a good thing to know, so that we're not, as you're taking pictures out in the field, that you're not stepping on these as you're taking pictures of yellow lady slippers. They grow in the same place. You might be squishing these other orchids along the way. So it's good to know what these orchid leaves look like. And they're usually very long. They grow straight upwards. They're kind of hairy leaves on the showy lady slipper. What a great bloom. I love that. Beautiful bloom. This is our state flower. And maybe we'll get a chance to talk a little bit more about the stories of the showy lady slipper. Now, some people call this pink lady slipper, but really the pink lady slipper is a different plant. The stemless lady slippers are also called pink lady slippers, and it blooms a little bit earlier. But this one is the showy lady slipper. A little white to it. Sometimes it can be just barely pink, and there's been a few that are just white. And that's the showy lady slipper. Oh, watch for the Indian paintbrush. This orange color is going to start coming out too. Again, they like a lot more sunlight, so you'll find these in more of the grassy areas. Indian paintbrush is out. Now, a few of the critters to watch for along the way, and this is throughout the month of June. Of course, turtles are always basking in the sun, but they are really out there right now. I feel like June, there's just turtles everywhere. In fact, you want to watch out for them alongside the roads. They are crossing the roads, and generally these are the females out crossing the roads. So they might need a helping hand in terms of getting those, making it across the road. They do bite, so even the painted turtles, you want to hold on to the very back end of their shell if you help them move in the direction that they're headed across the road. And of course, they're heading for areas with soft soil, sandy soils that they can find a place to lay eggs. And this female is using her back legs to dig a nice hole, and will deposit her eggs there and cover up the hole when she's done laying her eggs. And those turtles will stay in there probably through the whole winter. Generally, in our area, the painted turtles might hatch, but they won't come out of the soil. They'll hibernate right underneath in their nest until the spring. So when you see little turtles right now coming out, it's because they were actually laid last spring. So they have quite a bit of incubation time frame. They usually hatch later in September, but then will probably just stay underground until the spring. And they have the resources to be able to do that. Oh, the dragonflies. This one, I believe, is a chalk-fronted corporal dragonfly, but the basket tail hatch in June is fantastic. There are dragonflies everywhere. Just kind of this emergence of dragonflies. And of course, they like to eat mosquitoes, so they're our friends. We love to have dragonflies out and about. But what a cool experience to have dragonflies buzzing around you. They are amazing. This time of year, the little cygnets are hatching. Of course, earlier we saw ducklings and goslings, and now little cygnets out on the refuge. And wow, we've got about 50 pairs of trumpeter swans out there, nesting swans, and even more swans that aren't paired up. You know, it takes 4 or 5 years before they develop a pair bond and nest. So there's a lot of young ones hanging out there as well. So hundreds of them on the refuge. We estimate these days well over 100 little cygnets that hatch right on the refuge, and of course many more beyond the refuge boundaries as well. And if you're lucky, you might get a sneak peek at a tiny fawn. The fawning is happening, and this one is tucked away while its parents are away. So the female deer will be out and about feeding, and the fawns will hide out. So it's not unusual to see a fawn left alone by its lonesome. It's good not to disturb them. You know, they only get fed 3 or so times a day, so they need to conserve their energy. So you don't want to get too close and scare off the fawns. And as they get a little bit older, they'll start venturing out and feeding on their own, eating those lovely lush plants that we just talked about. And June is also breeding season for the black bear. So a lot of sightings of black bear on the refuge this time of year. I guess this means the end. So usually when we see bears out and about, you see them heading the other direction. So you just see this side of them, generally speaking. But there are black bears on the refuge, and as long as you make noise, they will take off. Chances are they're going to smell you. They have an amazing sense of smell, and they'll be taking off before you even see them out there. All right, so a lot of things to see on the refuge, and lots of great places to visit, whether you take a drive down the wildlife drive or a hike into the woods. Lots of places to visit. The refuge is open, the trails are open. There's great fishing on Tamarac Lake, Waboose Lake, Lost Lake. There are lots of places that you can visit. So I encourage you to get outside, find your favorite wild place, and enjoy some nature. It's good for you.